Okay. Are we ready? Let's gather ourselves with a brief word of prayer. Oh God, we give thanks for the gift of siblings in Christ, for the privilege that we have of growing in faith together as the Presbytery of Chicago. These are days in which our hearts are heavy and when we are seeking to be part of the work of peace and not violence and conflict. Oh God, grant that we would be guided by your wisdom and appreciate the gifts that are ours amongst the whole community of faith in the Presbytery of Chicago. Amen.
Amen.
Well, friends, grace and peace to all of you as we gather for this pre-Presbytery event. It is Tools for Talking in Trying Times, Tending Wounds of Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. My name is Brian Paulson. I'm a teaching elder, now completing today my term this year as moderator of the Ecumenical and Interreligious Work Group. The EI Work Group hopes to help foster an appreciation of diverse religious communities in the Chicagoland area, to help foster mutual understanding of the concerns, values, and beliefs among those communities, and to help foster sustainable relationships of strong and common service. I'm going to periodically put some links into the chat so that you can follow up on things at a later point in time. And right now I'm putting into the chat a link that is to our portion of the Presbytery website if you want to learn more about our work. The events taking place in Israel, Gaza, Palestine, well, they're just traumatic and escalating with violence. And there are people, precious lives, and there are ecumenical and interreligious partners and their institutions who are caught in the crossfire. And so many of us feel called to act and demonstrate solidarity in a diversity of ways. I commend for your use a new landing page of the Presbyterian Church USA, where you can be involved with other Presbyterians whose hearts are seeking ways to address these terrible events. And here I've just inserted the link to that landing page at the PCUSA. This seminar is something different, however. In line with the purpose of the EI work group, we are offering insight from Presbyterian tools that are meant to help foster understanding, relationships, and appreciation. Our goal is to offer assistance for local Presbyterians talking with their neighbors in the days surrounding the table talking time of Thanksgiving. In trying times, our dialogue sometimes falters, and relationships can be strained by the wounds of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. The PCUSA has a study paper that is meant to help us avoid those pitfalls in conversation. I'm going to put a link to that paper in the chat right now. Today we have Dr. Heidi Hadsel, one of the authors of that paper, who will speak about ways we can work to overcome Islamophobia. Heidi was chair of the General Assembly Ecumenical Interreligious Relations Committee when I had the privilege of serving with her. She's the past president of Hartford Seminary and was vice president for academic affairs at McCormick Seminary. And then our own Annette Sawyer, teaching elder at Fourth Presbyterian Church and past moderator of our EI work group, who continues to coordinate our Muslim and Jewish dialogues. She also participated in the writing of this General Assembly paper and will speak about ways that we can work to overcome anti-Semitism. During our large group time, all the microphones will be muted so we can share the material in a timely way. And then we'll go into breakout groups where all will be unmuted so that we can process what we've heard together with the facilitator. As time permits, we'll return to the large group and facilitators can share any insights or questions or tools that they wish to have from our work group and share that with the speakers and our group. Our time is structured in this way. We're going to have Heidi and Annette present for about 10 minutes each, and then we'll go into breakout groups with the facilitator for about 10 minutes in those breakout groups. And finally, we'll have our time together as a large group and receive any feedback from the facilitators. So that's our working plan. And at this time, I'm going to turn to Heidi so she can guide us into the first portion of our time together.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's wonderful to be with you and wonderful to be with folks from the Chicago area. I was at McCormick 9 years, and there were nine very precious years to me, and good to see people like Craig and all. So my job is to think with you about Islamophobia, and I've written a page, and I apologize for the formality of that, but I've got 10 minutes, and I want to make sure that I get said what I want to get said. So I'll just dive in. Since this conflict began, I, like you, I am sure, have been struggling to see what I can do, what my own moral responsibility is, what Presbyterian moral responsibilities are, what human responsibilities are. And as I struggle, the phrase that has come to me repeatedly is that of Paul Lehman, who some of you may remember was a Presbyterian ethicist, who I had the good luck to learn from at Union Seminary decades ago, when he was ending his career and I was starting my graduate education. The phrase he used about our Christian moral responsibility individually and collectively is, and I quote, "to make and to keep human life human in the image of Jesus Christ." I think this phrase helps to give one some perspective and forces one to search for and to see the humanity and inhumanity of all who are directly involved in this horrible moment of death and destruction. And it also, and importantly, requires us to see afresh our own humanity and the ways in which we are or may be complicit. I also think that maybe this moral challenge of Paul Lehman's can give us the courage in this moment not to automatically resort to simply confirming the biases we have. That is, in this case, not to simply resort to confirming the biases we may have about Muslims. Biases that many non-Muslim Americans carry around with us, but rather to slow down and to examine the assumptions and experiences and prejudices that we bring with us as we form an idea of what is going on and who is doing what. And in this moment, it is definitely important to consider Islamophobia. There are many roots of Islamophobia and of Islamophobia of different kinds and roots of different kinds. There are historical roots and geographical roots and theological roots, political roots, and undoubtedly economic roots, and so forth. The ideas we, North American Presbyterians, have of Muslims and of Islam in general inevitably play a role, and often a large role, in forming the worldviews we bring to our understanding of and analysis of conflicts like those happening in Gaza and beyond. Inevitably, our tendency at the time of conflicts such as this is to look for confirmation of our biases. And if we are already reasonably ignorant about Islam and Muslims, And we have absorbed the deep suspicion and hatred post 9/11 that many non-Muslim Americans automatically carry towards Muslims. We may find ourselves saying things like, see, Muslims are violent, I knew it. Sneaky or untrustworthy or despicable human beings with no redeeming human characteristics or values or feelings. Paying attention to these anti-Muslim feelings and ideas and examining Islamophobia and its roots is one way to notice and to question our own assumptions about Muslims and Islam. And some of the elements that underlie American prejudice against Muslims in good times and bad. These elements are fully, or more fully than I'm going to do here, discussed in the document that Brian was just talking about, denouncing anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Historically speaking, both Christians and Islam are expansionist religions. Both value active and aggressive and widespread actions towards conversions to their own faith. Given the shared characteristics of expansionism, one can easily see how in history, the two traditions, in many different places and ways, inevitably competed with and still compete with each other for converts, for religious political power, for possession of theological truth, and so forth. And they competed and conflicted with each other, and still do, in ways such as violently in movements like the Crusades, which, by the way, were instigated by Christians and which today many Christians know nothing about, but Muslims carry deep within their collective memory. Theologically, Christians view Jesus as the end of the story. He is the unique revelation of God to humankind. He is God and part of the unique revelation to humankind. Muslims recognize and even revere Jesus as a prophet. They also recognize and revere Abraham and a number of other prophets honored by both Jews and Christians. But they consider Muhammad, their prophet, as God's last prophet, and the Quran, which Muhammad received from God, as God's final and complete revelation. Christians clearly disagree. Geographically, Islam is widespread, but mostly found in parts of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And most Christians in the United States have not had significant opportunities to interact with, to get to know, to learn from or about Muslims, unless they've traveled or studied in areas of the world that are predominantly Muslim. Today, there are something like 4.5 million Muslims in the United States as citizens. That's 1.3% of the population. This means that relatively few Americans have had the opportunity to personally get to know Muslim colleagues here, or to have Muslim friends and neighbors and the like. This is important. Many studies show time and again that direct interaction with the other that one fears but does not really know is perhaps the best way to break down walls of suspicion and hatred. Indeed, my own interest in Islam and in Christian-Muslim relations is in part due to the fact that my sister fell in love and married a man from Iran. When she did, I was able to see how even a family that wholeheartedly embraced God's inclusive love for all, that is my family, needed its religious community to accompany them in that journey. Theologically, yes, needed them theologically, yes, but also practically and in terms of providing friendship and fellowship. At that time, our church and our denomination was not really prepared to fully accompany my family in that journey. And I suspect that many of us are still not prepared. Politically, 9/11 is seared into our collective memory. 9/11 was, as we well know, perpetrated by Muslims and in the name of Islam. And it was the first time that many people in the United States had ever really even thought about Muslims or Islam. The strong feelings about 9/11 and over the years, subsequent geopolitical events, both local and national, have encouraged many of our unscrupulous politicians and some other public figures, such as some prominent Christian religious leaders, to engage in the wholesale demonization of Islam and of Muslims. One of the reasons they do so is that the demonization of Islam and of Muslims, and then the accompanying selling of themselves as an important victor over or shield against Muslims, is a quick way to heighten their own popularity. And I would say to mask their own lack of constructive policy ideas or to hide their policy commitments that are actually antithetical to the well-being of those who elected them. So we've talked about theologically, graphically, politically, historically, some of the roots of Islamophobia. One of the sad consequences of the demonization of Islam and Muslims is that many Christians will never know the bonds of friendship that could have been and still could be nurtured if Christians took the time to learn about Islam and to get to know individual Muslims. Among the things that one could learn is the high respect for Jesus as a prophet and for Mary, the mother of Jesus, that one finds in the Quran. Muslims see major differences between our religious traditions, but they also see areas of commonality between Muslims and Christians and Jews. Indeed, Muslims use the expression people of the book as an inclusive way of grouping together Muslims, Christians, and Jews. So in conclusion, I don't have very many minutes here. I would like to, again, invite you to work with, to discover, to download, to work with yourselves or in small groups or whatever with the document on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. It can be a real help in times like these. As people committed to participating in efforts to make and to keep human life human in the image of Jesus, we can and should learn about and from Islam and Muslims and encourage each other to be self-aware and self-critical of our tendencies to look at events such as those in Palestine and Israel today as occasions to confirm our own often limited worldviews and the prejudices and limitations contained therein. Worldviews which, if we are not very careful, can result in our complicity in the dehumanization of both Muslims and Jews, and result as well in our own dehumanization. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. You've brought some good California sunshine into our midst, and we're grateful for that. I turn now to our own teaching elder and colleague, Nanette Sawyer from Fourth Press. She's been doing an excellent job facilitating our dialogues with the Muslim and Jewish communities, and I turn to her now as one of the authors of this document that we've shared in chat, this General Assembly PCUSA document on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, to help us focus on its contents regarding anti-Semitism. Nanette?
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Well, this is a very difficult and painful time in our world, and it's with fear and trepidation that we try to speak about these issues because there is so much passion and there are life and death issues at play here in Chicago, as well as in Israel, Palestine, and various other places around the world. So we're trying to bring tools for talking, and that's really what I want to talk about here. As we engage, there is passion that happens, and how can we be aware of how our words and concepts and the ways we're talking and thinking about these issues may trigger emotional reactions in others. How can we be aware of the impact of our words or the phrases or concepts we choose to use? In addition to what we think we're saying, sometimes what is heard by others is something different. So I'm going to try to give a few examples of that kind of thing. So following up on what Heidi said, how can we be a people who humanize each other, who humanize all people as we seek to look at these issues? So I'm going to be talking about how the words and concepts we use when we're talking about Jewish people in general are important, and also in relation to the current war, and how we need to be aware of when our own tendencies may lead us to slip into a stereotype or some biased language, as Heidi touched upon. So I'm grounding these comments in the same document that Heidi lifted up. And I invite everybody to take a deep breath. Tools for talking, taking a deep breath and noticing how our body feels in this moment right now is one tool. When our bodies get filled with a rush of adrenaline because we feel passionate reactions to what we're hearing or what we're seeing or reading about, or what we see people we love going through, adrenaline rushes into our body. And it literally takes 20 minutes for our bodies to flush that adrenaline out after we've stepped away from that kind of incident. That kind of exchange, that kind of passionate engagement. So sometimes we have to take a break from talking. And that's one tool for talking. And I invite you into that spirit as I begin here. The study document names anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as evils, as sins, and points out that the church has been responsible for playing a role in creating and reiterating and reinforcing these sins over time. So we need to understand where and how that has happened so that we can repair some of the damage that's been done and prevent further damage. So the document gives some examples of where we find anti-Semitism in our Holy Scriptures and in our PCUSA Book of Confessions. And in the study document's denunciation of anti-Semitism, we began with two definitions of anti-Semitism from two different groups, one Jewish group, the Anti-Defamation League, and one group of scholars, which included a number of Jews. So the Anti-Defamation League defines anti-Semitism as the belief or behavior hostile toward Jews because they are Jewish. It may take the form of religious teachings that proclaim the inferiority of Jews, for instance, or political efforts to isolate, oppress, or otherwise injure them. It may also include prejudiced or stereotyped views about Jews. So this definition speaks about hostility, taught inferiority, isolation, oppression, and injury. It talks about prejudice and stereotyping, and it calls out religious teaching in particular, and that's where we as churches need to take a good hard look. So I strongly recommend a careful read of the whole document to get examples of the anti-Semitism in our scriptures and Book of Confessions. I'm not going to linger there today because I want to get into some other aspects, specifically around the second definition that we used in the paper. We selected the second definition which is called the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism. And it's pretty easy to find if you Google that. But it defines anti-Semitism as discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews, or Jewish institutions as Jewish. So that's the basic definition. But we chose this definition because there are a couple of pages of materials giving examples and exploring nuances, specifically about the relationship of anti-Semitism to anti-Zionism, whether or when anti-Semitism gets tangled up there. And that's an issue that comes up a lot in our conversations. The declaration was written and published in March of 2021, just to give you a context, by an international group of scholars. So it's the work of academics, and they were scholars in Jewish studies, Holocaust studies, Israel, Palestine, and Middle East studies. And briefly, this document describes when statements about Israel-Palestine are anti-Semitic and when they're not anti-Semitic on the face of it. And that's a quote. On the face of it, some are not anti-Semitic. But they also have things for us to consider about when something that on the face of it is not anti-Semitic might become anti-Semitic. So I'm going to name a couple of things that are in that declaration that are considered anti-Semitic in regard to Israel and Palestine. This is a quote: holding Jews collectively responsible for Israel's conduct is anti-Semitic. This means whenever Jews are attacked physically or verbally or in any way harmed as a retribution for what the Israeli government or military have done, that's anti-Semitic. That's acting as though this Jew or that Jew is responsible for what the Israeli military has done. Another example is, quote again, requiring people because they are Jewish to publicly condemn Israel or Zionism, for example, at a political meeting. So this then, would be requiring Jews, but not other people, to say what their opinions are about the situation in Israel, Palestine, or about the actions of the Israeli government or military. And this kind of anti-Semitism might lead to excluding Jews from certain meetings or rallies or events if they won't publicly condemn Israel or Zionism. That kind of targeting and exclusion is a kind of anti-Semitism. Another definition or explanation that's given is the idea of, and I quote this, denying the right of Jews in the state of Israel to exist and flourish collectively and individually as Jews in accordance with the principle of equality. Denying the right of Jews in the state of Israel to exist and flourish collectively and individually as Jews in accordance with the principle of equality. To deny them that right is a kind of anti-Semitism that targets Jews as Jews. So some of these forms of anti-Semitism are coming up right now in the United States and in Chicago. And I think these kinds of ways of thinking are related to the uptick in anti-Semitic violence that we're seeing here and around the world since the Hamas attack on October 7th and the ensuing war. So, tools for talking. I want to give a couple of examples of when we think we're saying one thing, but some of our conversation partners hear something else. This is looking at the difference between the impact of what we say and the intention of what we think we're saying. One phrase that's used is the phrase, from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is something that's appearing on signs in the pro-Palestinian rallies. It's also a phrase that's been used historically throughout the conflict, and it's been used by extremists on both sides of the conflict. From the river to the sea has meant from the river to the sea will be all of our people, and the other people will be gone. When I was traveling there last summer, I was in Jordan. In the Jordan airport, I saw maps of Palestine. There was no Israel on the map of Palestine. From the river to the sea, it was Palestine. What does that mean? What would be happening in there? I'm going to get into that next. But we've also, some of us have seen these maps of the region that get called the Swiss cheese maps, that show Palestine with all the Jewish settlements in it. And we say, well, how can this be Palestine if it's also Jewish everywhere? These are just some things to be aware of, how our words might strike differently. So I was talking with a pro-Palestinian demonstrator recently who believes that when she is chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, she believes that it means that Jews and Palestinians will be living together in peace throughout the land. But when I'm talking to other my Jewish friends have said, you know, what that means to them is the obliteration of Jewish people from the land, from the river to the sea. What does it mean? We have understandings, but other people hear what they hear, and for good reasons. Another phrase to think about and maybe explore with our neighbors is the phrase, I stand with Israel. Now, what does that mean when someone says it? And what does it mean when someone hears it? Some people might hear that to mean, I stand with Israel no matter what they do, and I support every single action of the military and the policies. But for other people, it means, I stand for the survival of the Jewish homeland, and I can't back down from standing for that. This is something that can be explored if we can summon up compassionate listening and listening to understand, which could be some other tools for talking. I stand with Israel can mean people stand with the idea of a homeland, but not all the actions of the state or the military. I have just a minute or two, just a minute left. So I'll say the word Zionism is another word that has many different meanings. There are many kinds of Zionism, and what it means to people differs. Some people think that critiquing Zionism simply means critiquing a governmental organizational style of, you know, it's just critiquing a government. And other people hear a critique of Zionism means you know, it means the disappearance of the Jewish people in that land. It means the undermining of the existence of Israel. So these are some words that we have to explore in dialogue with each other and with our neighbors. Tools for talking: take that deep breath, notice what's happening in the body, take a break and walk away for 20 minutes and come back with compassion. Be curious. Ask those probing questions. Well, when you say that phrase, what does that mean to you? What are you envisioning for the future of the world or for the future of people? And hold on to the complexity of the situation. It's not an either or simple story. I would say be humble. We in Chicago cannot solve the problem, but we can care for people. And we can even advocate for people with our elected leaders. And my final point would be, may we all work for peace and well-being of all the peoples in the region. I was going to say both peoples, but that's almost falling into the trap of oversimplifying. For all the peoples in the region. So thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nanette, and thank you for all the hard work that is represented in the document. That's a gift to our church and for the time that you've given. What I'm going to invite us into is a chance for everyone to talk, because there's a lot to absorb, and I know that there are so many other things that folks may have wanted to be talking about. Again, our goal was more modest, to use some tools that we have to facilitate talking in and amongst our churches and at tables as we're approaching into the Thanksgiving season. Some of those tools for just listening with compassion are very useful even for these breakout groups. So be kind to your facilitators. They're going to try to gather what you're saying. And I want to invite you to share if there are new tools that you think would be helpful for you that the EI work group could work on. Be sure to name that in your group. That's what we're especially going to be listening for. But if you want to just listen in this group, then that's fine too, to your peers. If you have something really on your heart to share, that's fine. We have limited time before we get to the assembly itself. So I'm just going to let us go into these groups now. Remember, you've got some documents on chat. My successor will be Dr. Bob Cathy, who's on this group. He provided a number of resources that came out with the call papers. That's also a resource for you as well. So let's now go into our small groups. Craig, is everyone back in the group now?
Yep. Okay.
So I'm just going to go down the list and check in with Bob Cathy. Any feedback from your group of tools that you need help with for the EI work group, or things that are commonly heartfelt in your team?
Yes, thank you, and thanks to the members of Breakout Group 2. One area we need to educate ourselves on is the varieties of Christianity in the regions called the Middle East, West Africa, West Asia, North Africa region. We don't know enough about our Christian sisters and brothers there. We need to learn more. Secondly, we need tools to understand the varieties of Zionism. What do people mean by Zionism? And third, we need to understand what about the silences in these debates and conversations. It's often if you attend to the silences, what people are not talking about, sometimes you discover something really crucial about what's really important that's being hidden, that's too difficult to talk about. So what are the silences in our conversations? And very good to hear from members of our group about what they're doing in local interfaith organizations to address this at Thanksgiving. So thanks to Group 2.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to check in now with Beth Fries-Dammers.
Thank you. One of the key things from our group was we would really appreciate more conversation and a definition around what is a refugee. Particularly, what does that mean? Why are there refugee camps in Gaza? What has been the history of refugees, and how does that impact our discussion today?
Thank you. I'm going to check in with my colleague who I hooked into this, Nicole Chapman-Farley.
We had a few questions that we could use additional conversation. One was talking about the struggle of not quote unquote siding with Jews or Muslims, but loving them both. How do you do that while you are in the presence of both? How do you do that relationally when all three are gathered together? Also, the discussion about the decades-long deaths that have been going on, and what does it mean when you enter into the discussion about proportionality of deaths? Is it worse? Is the group worse who's caused more deaths? Basically talking through all of the actions that have brought us to this point. And then lastly, is in relation to that, how do you affirm the desire and hope for the existence of a homeland for Jewish people and show that you're committed to Jewish people while also condemning the actions that have happened?
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Annette now for your group.
We were in the same group, Brian,
Oh,
Annette and I.
right. Okay, so there were 4 groups then, I'm guessing, Craig. My group, when we were sharing what a few things that was concerned about related to religion's role in Christian nationalism and how that plays out in some of our bias. And we also had a word in the Amen Corner for Bob Cathy's effort to present a document that gave a lot of resources that was well balanced, I heard, but just how deeply our hearts ache over what feels like an intractable conflict, and how very difficult it is to walk beside folks, and especially if you've had long relationships with Palestinian neighbors and friends in the Western Asia, North Africa region. And one tool they especially wondered about was, is there some tool to help us understand Hamas, its background, its origin, its motivations, and so forth? So those were some of the things that came through our group. Is there some group that I've missed by not calling out a name?
Yes, our group.
Okay, good, Heidi. Yeah, what'd you come up with?
But I think our group feels strongly the pain of what's going on in Israel, Gaza, Palestine, and wishes there were ways to say what's in one's heart, what one feels is wrong, without being afraid of being called out by one side or another, or being shut down for being wrong.
Yeah, well, there's a challenge. I think that phrase compassionate listening for understanding is very helpful in that regard. I don't think we have anyone else that's in another group that was missed, and I know that we're up against our time barrier. Am I right about that? Okay, and notice that Bob Cathy gave a book. He's a walking bibliography, Bob Cathy. So he's got something in there on Hamas for all of you. And I just want to also put in chat one more time the landing space if you want to see some resources that the denomination has related to the conflict, because I know that is on everyone's heart. Again, Bob's bibliographies in the call papers, you can find that. And please reach out to Bob as the incoming chair of our group. And if there are ways that we can provide resources for you and your ministry and outreach in the communities, we will do that. A warm expression of gratitude and thanks to you, Heidi, especially for traveling all the way from California to be with us today.
Right.
And to all the facilitators that I've roped in at the last minute, and Nanette, as always, for the hard work that you do. And I see the faces here, and I know so many of you have long ties and hard work and good work for justice and concern in so many ways with your neighborhoods and also with our partners in Western Asia, North Africa region. And thank you for that witness and passion. I want to keep listening to your voices on behalf of our siblings all around the world, and we're grateful for you. With that, I think we've reached the end of our time together, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord, friends. And now I yield back my time to the executive president.
You have no time. You're down 3 minutes.
Senator. I'm gonna pay for this.
But we are very much appreciative of it. Was just outstanding information that was shared, and I'm personally challenged to continue to do research and understanding and be informed as I speak, right, and represent the Presbytery of Chicago. We're going to begin our Presbytery Assembly at 4 o'clock.